Making of a Great Nation by Peter L. Bernstein. Now, Mr. Bernstein published this book in 2006, and he passed away in 2009. So this is probably his last great work. It's, as you've seen, it's deeply researched, a lot of footnotes, um, a lot of index, a lot of deep dives into the history. Now, I hope everyone learns something. I've been writing for the Times Union for 40 years and written thousands of articles on our local history. I think history is probably our greatest asset in this region, and I learned a lot from this book. Um, so I'll do a pop quiz. Where is the first lock in the Erie Canal located? Anyone want to raise their hand and ask in chat, or does anyone, you can blurt it out if you want. This isn't Jeopardy. It's an interesting question because Albany figures very important in this book, and we're going to kind of spin it forward with a project that Pam's involved with, I'm involved with. BJ Costello, who's here as the chairman of the Albany Waterway, which is looking at exactly, where this book starts. So there were no, so Lock One in Albany, it's kind of near the central warehouse, which will be torn down, partly under the modern press building. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later. Um, but one of the figures that I was not aware of, and he's a major figure, he's got an interesting name, Elkanah Watson. Did you come across him? He had started as kind of an indentured servant and he rose up. He was very smart making connections. He knew how to kind of navigate between powerful, rich, and powerful, politically powerful people. He was a friend of General Philip Schuyler, who figures into this story, obviously a major player. Gouverneur Morris, founding father. So DeWitt Clinton. But this Elkin Watson came to Albany because he was very interested in this idea of a canal. And he was really, he and DeWitt Clinton and others can really rightfully claim that the very early idea for this. Now, it wasn't a brand new idea. It had been kicking around for a few decades before they finally got around to doing the work. And obviously, they didn't have modern technology. They didn't have modern engineering. They had to rely on shovels and picks, and they used a lot of Irish immigrants and other day laborers. And it's just a remarkable engineering feat. 363 miles from Albany out to Buffalo, connecting the Hudson River and the Erie, or Lake Erie rather. And what they overcame was remarkable, just in physical challenges, disease, weather, a lot of obstacles. But there were some forerunners to this. They'd been working on the idea of a canal before this. Erastus Corning's great grandfather, the original Erastus Corning, he was involved in some land speculation and some smaller canals. There were a series of smaller canals because it was really, the highway system of the day to try to move goods and people across really rugged terrain. Um, when they could dig the canal and create this way to move cargo and people much more efficiently and faster. So the Erie Canal cut the time from going to Albany to Buffalo from about 10 to 14 days to 5 days. It reduced the cost of moving goods that far. You would have to do it in stagecoaches and wagons before. And the canal, reduced the cost of moving goods and transportation by 80 or 90%. And I don't know if anyone has anyone looked at there's a few places where the Erie Canal is still visible in Albany, and as you drive out the thruway, have you seen? It's really small scale. It's only 4 feet deep. I mean, imagine that. That's the shallow end in swimming pools. That's kind of up to you, a little bit above your waist. And it was 4 feet deep, 40 feet wide. But it really changed everything in terms of connecting this Western frontier to the great economic engine of New York City, and obviously trade with Europe across the Atlantic. So it was a remarkable feat. Um, there's kind of a summary. I like the introduction because he lays out his theme, and I'll just read this very first summary on page 22 that kind of lays it out in one paragraph. When the canal was completed in October 1825 and Governor DeWitt Clinton could celebrate the wetting of the waters by pouring a keg of water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic Ocean, he opened an uninterrupted navigable waterway through the imposing barrier of the mountain range extending from Maine all the way down to Georgia. The end result would lead to an historic explosion of commerce, ideas, and technological change. By bringing the interior to the seas and the seas into the interior, the Erie Canal would shape a great nation, knit the sinews of the Industrial Revolution, propel globalization, extending America's networks outside our own borders, and revolutionize the production and supply of food for the entire world. That was by no means all. In time, the skinny ditch in upstate New York would demonstrate that trade and commerce are the keys to the expansion of prosperity and freedom itself. Pretty amazing. I mean, he's a very good writer. I love that phrase, knit the sinews of the Industrial Revolution, propel globalization, revolutionize the production and supply of food for the entire world. Yeah, he's a really nimble writer who takes a lot of research and a lot of data and moves a lot of characters in and out of his story, and then he can kind of synthesize what it all means. And you can't really overstate what it meant. So 1825, imagine that's 200 years ago. We're coming up on the 200th anniversary very soon. There's events uh, happening, and Governor Hochul is getting involved, and I think Historic Albany is also doing some things related to this. I mean, this book club is part of it. But I'm interested in hearing, some ideas and see if there's things in the chat that you want to talk about. You didn't come here to hear me talk. I'm the moderator, generally talks very little and gets the discussion going. So who wants to say something about the book? First of all, I guess, was it all old news to you, or did you learn some things? What stuck out to you in this book?
Paul, can I speak?
Yes,
Yeah.
of course, Commander.
So what you just read, which is on page 22, is sort of looking at it at the end.
Right.
When you look at it at the beginning, you've got President Jefferson saying this is a little bit short of madness.
Yes.
Right. And at the end, DeWitt Clinton never paid a penny for his efforts. He never received any compensation. And Jefferson said at the very end that perhaps the greatest of all Americans is DeWitt Clinton. And had the Erie Canal not come into being, all those goods from the Midwest would go down the Mississippi and they'd go out and make the port of New Orleans huge. And that would become the central economic engine of America rather than New York City. And I think there was something in there that really struck me. It said this was the longest canal in the world, built in the least time, 7 years, with the least experience. They had no engineers. These guys
No,
were
I
making
know
it up
they were
on the
making
run.
it up as they went along. Exactly.
And they had to get through all those trees. They invented stuff to get rid of forest for the least amount of money. They spent $7 million for the greatest public benefit. And the money was, by 1835, 10 years after it was completed, they had paid it off.
Right.
So, when you look at the end view that you're looking at, it is so apparent that how important this was. It made us the Empire State. It changed the nature of Albany. It changed the nature of New York City. It opened everything up. And I mean, that's really, you think of all the things that they overcame and all the negative stuff. And then in 1815, they decided to take all the money back. And here's DeWitt Clinton. He's thrown out of office. He has no money. And he just keeps going. So it gives us hope for the future. I mean, there's, if they could overcome all that stuff, and essentially the other point that was made in that book is without the constant repetition of the accumulated results of successive explorations and analysis over the years, and without the many eloquent recitals of the rewards that would justify the effort and the risk, the canal would never have come into being.
Yeah,
So
no,
it's a
there was no
matter.
guarantee it was going to ever get finished or even get started. There were a lot of naysayers. The idea was floated for a long time. It didn't get much traction. Um, and you're familiar with the political process. It's amazing how long it takes to build, I don't know, a stadium or a highway or a bridge. 200 years ago to build what they built. And we haven't even talked about the locks and the way locks, which we'll get into. The waterway that BJ chairs that I mentioned is very much involved in restoring and reclaiming that great history. We'll get to that, but let's ask Marty Bannon with this hand up. Do you want to turn your sound or camera on? Go ahead, Marty.
I'll turn the camera back on too. Okay,
Okay.
hi everyone. Just what Mr. Costello mentioned about that New Orleans could have could have become the major port in America. And if we didn't have the Erie Canal, and also let's say we didn't also do the Champlain Canal, how would that affect the outcome and the sinews of the Civil War? That's an interesting, thing I thought was.
That's a great question. I'm not a military historian, but I do know that New York wouldn't have been New York without it. I mean, the title we like to claim, the Empire State, that this canal kind of created this sense of empire and New York being a national and global leader. I don't know who wants to weigh in on how it would have affected Civil War. It's a good question. Do we have any military historians in the group?
Are we on?
Yes, you're on.
Yeah, I'm not a military historian, but I did read the last part of the book today. And he addresses how the canal led to the success of the North in the Civil War. The Civil War was, a lot of people feel, won because of the networks of railroads and canals that were built and the communication that was in the North that didn't exist in the South. And that was all started with the Erie Canal. So the author of the book actually says that he felt the Erie Canal led to the success of the North in the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, the railroads were not by the 1860s were not as developed. So yeah, I mean, it did move a lot of munitions and everything else. It's amazing how much they could move on 4 feet of water. Those packet boats were just very flat. They were kind of like flatbed trucks that you see on the highways today. And you couldn't put anything that had that drew a lot of water. It would just get caught in the muddy bottom. And but it just needed to be flat and have a shallow draft, as they call it. That's great. So I see Lucinda Higgins, everyone. I was interested in the ingenuity of those who were able to deal with problems they encountered as they came upon them. Yeah, I think, as ingenuity, but also as much as kind of grit and perseverance. And, the World War II, what this country overcame and defeating Hitler, often called the greatest generation. I don't know. I think this generation has a claim to being the greatest to take this, as BJ had mentioned. I mean, the engineering colleges in our area are two of the oldest. They did have Union College, RPI as well was in its early stages by 1820. But they did it without certainly without machines that would make it easier. And I think they just overcame uh, just the challenges, physical challenges, weather, getting through tough terrain and rocks. And I don't, other than sheer willpower, and certainly people got injured, certainly people died in the making of it. And I think it's a similar theme that they exploited immigrant labor. I mean, I think that's a fact. So Steve Miller, the canal bottom was lined with stone. Okay, but I have a fish pond that I dug in my backyard. No matter how you try, it fills in with silt and leaves, and I've been stone eventually, but I guarantee in a couple of years it was covered with silt and mud and leaves and debris. But I do think, yeah, they did they did drop some stones in there.
You know, Paul, one of the interesting things that I found, talk about ingenuity. They had a problem because the walls of the canal would let water seep through. They
Right,
couldn't figure out how to solve it. And I think it was in Canastota, someplace in the middle of the state. They figured out how to use lime that was prevalent, you know, a lot of it there. And they figured out how to mix it and effectively create a cement that
right.
solved that problem. And without that, you'd never have a canal. But these things
No,
were learned on the fly. That's the ingenuity of Americans.
yeah. I don't know, is anyone else? I did my own homemade backyard pond, and they actually sell rubber liners for that effect. Otherwise, you'd fill with water and it would drain out in, in hours or a day or something. But yeah, they had to find something that was non-porous that would
Well,
keep the
that was
water
called
out.
hydraulic cement. It had been discovered previously by the British, but it really depends on finding a very, very particular kind of limestone, which happened to be out there in the Utica area. And that was canvas white.
Right, canvas white.
Waterford is generally credited with that, although people who run the D&H Canal Museum claim that somebody down there also did it, or at a parallel time. And once it was discovered, anybody who had one of those quarries for that limestone was quite wealthy. Unfortunately, Mr. White, who patented the process, it was almost always pirated, and he ended up not really making any money off of the royalties.
Hmm.
I appreciate that, Steve. You seem very knowledgeable. Are you an engineer? Are you a
No,
maritime
I happen
historian?
to have written an article for a newsletter for a local historical organization on the development of hydraulic cement.
That's great. So, the locks certainly were lined. Okay, I'm not disputing. I agree that they would want to line them, but how did they keep them free of debris and silt year after year? Does anyone have an
Well,
answer to that? You know, it wasn't a rushing river or anything. It was kind of flat water. Um,
well, I think they could have dredged it periodically.
right.
That
Yeah.
could be one. I don't remember that from the book.
I mean, I've seen them dredge the Mohawk, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to do a very short section. I mean, 363 miles is, although it was shallow. I mean, it's remarkable that they could move that much material and only have it that deep, you know.
Right. Well, the amazing thing is, I forget the figures, but when they did the first enlargement of the canal and made it what 2 feet deeper or 4 feet deeper, I think they doubled the depth, and
Right,
it like by a factor of 10 increased the cargo that could be carried.
right.
That's just
I mean, they couldn't keep it open during the winter.
right.
The locks and it was so it wasn't a year round, but
Mhm.
it still moved a tremendous amount of commerce. Yeah,
A number of years ago, I think shortly after Bernstein's book came out, there was actually an Erie Canal book club at the Rensselaer County Historical Society. We read this book and a couple of others. And I think the point you mentioned on the seasonal nature of the canal is very interesting because number one, people got used to having all these exotic products being able to be delivered to them. That I think when you could get oysters from New York City. Well,
right,
then the canal closes in November, and suddenly you don't have access to the things that you suddenly got used to, or very quickly got used to.
right.
And of course, the other thing is that because it was seasonal, it was eventually, by the 1850s or so, it was losing a lot of business to the railroads, which could operate generally 12 months a year.
Exactly. So this is a nice, interesting comment. Libby Liebschutz. I have found that a wonderful way to entertain out-of-town visitors especially those from other countries, is to take them first to the Cohoes Falls overlook so they get a sense of what the canal has to traverse, and then up to the top of Waterford Flight and back down along several of the locks of the flight, finishing up at Lock 2 in Waterford. That is amazing. I mean, that's a rocky promontory, and yeah, I mean they had to, they had to move that water up in those flights. I don't know, how far is it? 40, 50, 60 feet? It's a lot of elevation change, but I appreciate that. That's a good idea. Now, I know one person in this group has cycled more than once the whole 363 miles. Is that, Commander? What's your sense that you did that? You've done it regularly.
Yeah, I've done it 9 times. But what's interesting to me is it takes 6 days to do that on your bicycle. And I think a canal boat coming down, I forget how long it took, 5 days
It
maybe?
says 5 days generally, yeah.
5 days. And canal boats are going, they're being pulled by a horse or a mule
Right.
named Sal, for 15
I heard you
miles,
had a
right?
mule pulling you out there, BJ.
Yeah. But I
Right.
mean, so I think that's pretty impressive. 5 days is very, very impressive. It's
Yeah.
almost like the invention of the internet. Things became so quick that people were not used to it, that was pretty amazing.
And could you imagine just a flat ride on a flat water compared to like jumping over on a stagecoach, or, it'd be breaking your molars up every time you took a trip overland.
Yeah, I took a sailboat with the mast down from Albany up to Lake Champlain. And what you realize going through those locks is you just got to chill out. You can't make any speed because you come to a lock, and when the lock master wants to open it and let you through, they let you through. And
Right.
before that, you kind of sit there and sip on your beer and look at the beautiful surrounding countryside. So
Because I've written stories on the lock. They call them lock masters. I think there's some women that do it as well. But when they cut back on the Canal Corp, they would have to drive between locks, and they would just get there. Like they had like a 20-minute drive, and they had to open it on a 25-minute. They just had to rush between from lock and then back to lock, back to lock. One person had to handle 2 locks. I still remember that. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Kind of surprised they haven't automated it yet. Like they've automated almost all the bridges. All the
I know.
drawbridges are, they're being done remotely. But maybe
That's
there's
a big
something about
investment.
the locks.
I mean, I like looking when they still shut them down for the winter and the late fall, and you see it's just massive gears, massive. I mean, they used to be massive wood. They're now massive kind of iron gates, and it just locks, like it says, to hold the water and to lower or raise the water level. It looks very 19th century when I look at those locks.
Yeah, and those bridges, they have about 15 bridges between Rochester and Buffalo, and they're all lift bridges. So when a boat's coming through, there is a way. I don't know how they do it, but they may have a person there, but it's an automatic thing. You push a button and the bridge comes up and the boats go underneath. It's really interesting to see that.
Yeah. So, any more questions in the chat? That seems to work well. Here's one. From Michael Huber, my colleague and a supporter of the Historic Albany Foundation. I'm fascinated by the what if questions of history. Of course he would be. Mike got his master's degree in history from the University of Albany. What if we didn't have the political will to push this audacious project forward? What would become of our nation? Bernstein tells us that George Washington was concerned about that very thing. Quote, the pioneers moving west had little allegiance to the lands they left behind. If nothing were done, the young United States would be left squeezed behind the mountains and the sea. Yeah, I mean, it's what if is interesting, it's amazing how long things take in our state government now, but also this wasn't a slam dunk. It took a lot of time. It got shot down. I mean, BJ, you've been around how state politics work. Was this unusually quick or long or difficult or?
I think what was interesting here is, DeWitt Clinton, it turns out at some point in the book it mentions this, was not really a likable person. It was kind of all about him. And so he had a lot of political enemies, Martin Van Buren being one of them. And
Right.
it took a lot for them to say, we don't want to make this guy a hero. We don't want to make him a champion of anything. So whatever he thinks is a bad idea. And then you had the Federalists fighting, and you had the Hamilton people on one side, and you had the Aaron Burr people on the other side. And it became a political football. And that's not unusual at all in either New York State or federal government. It's not unusual. So it really took this tremendous perseverance by DeWitt Clinton, who just never quit. Without him, this wouldn't have happened. And the what if question is, I think Washington, well, I mean, in the 20th century, it wouldn't happen, but his fears were really, this bears back maybe to the Civil War question. His fears were that with the mountains, there'd be another nation set up on the other side of the mountains. They wouldn't be part of the United States. And so where would that put us? And he had tried to build a canal, as you know, privately funded it, and it failed. So the fact that this part of this trick was to get it publicly funded, which it finally was, and that made a difference. That made a huge difference.
Yeah.
So
Does anyone have young kids or grandkids? Are they teaching this much? And my sense is that you say the Erie Canal to other than the song that they used to teach. I don't know. Do you think kids know about this or are taught about it anymore? I don't know. In the New York State curriculum? Does anyone know?
No.
I don't know.
Well, I think what's difficult too, I mean, looking at it from a preservation perspective, there's so much of the canal that obviously isn't here anymore. I mean, Albany was either the start or the finish, depending on which way you were going. And we have a tiny bridge abutment left in front of what was Huck Finn. So many of our towns, Albany, Schenectady, different towns, you have an Erie Boulevard because the canal got filled in and it became a street. So I think there was a lot of history that has been lost and taken for granted and literally buried. So it doesn't exist anymore and is nowhere near top of mind anymore.
No,
But
it's
Pam,
funny, it is.
remember that there have been 3 versions of the canal. The original, the expanded, and the barge canal. And once the barge canal was completed, many places didn't see a need to keep that unused ditch anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the barge canal really did surpass it. Gene Kerr wrote in the chat, it's not taught in the high school U.S. history curriculum, maybe in the middle school curriculum. I'm not sure. And here's Beth Beechand. Because my parents brought me to see the remnants of the Erie Canal, I knew the history. Historic preservation keeps history alive. Go Pam and HAF. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I see a lot of familiar people who are interested in history but once again, this Elkanah Watson, who was kind of a driver, and he was wanting to take credit, like you said, so did DeWitt Clinton, who was all about him. But here's what he said about Albany. So he moves here to Albany from Rhode Island so he can be closer to the action and kind of get his friend Schuyler and the others involved. So he said he described Albany at that moment as a most unattractive place. A hilly town with streets lacking pavements and ungraded and no street lamps. The houses were equipped with long spouts that on rainy days poured water on the heads of unwary passersby. He was later to be known by some of the locals as that infernal paving Yankee. But he knew what he was about, for he was going to play a major role in converting this primitive village into a thriving and cosmopolitan center of commerce and trade. So when that Lock 1 got put in, we were the transit point between New York City and global trade up the Hudson out west, and we were this incredible hub of commerce.
Oh, we're on right here. Jack, we're up on the top.
I'm sorry. Here's one other comment. Renato, possibly some awareness in the Syracuse area, since there's an Erie Canal Museum in the city. That is actually a good segue to the Albany Waterway Incorporated, a not-for-profit group that is working on this. Pam is part of it. BJ is leading it. Len Tantillo envisioned it, the great artist, and I'm part of it as well. But BJ, do you want to talk briefly about what the waterway is and how you're trying to connect with what we're talking about from 200 years ago?
There's really, so the concept here, which Lynn Tantillo came up with on a napkin, and it's really because those of us who love Albany and love the capital region see what's happened to downtown as it's deteriorated. And you can walk through downtown on Broadway right now and you might not see anybody. And so it's hard to find a restaurant. It's hard to find people walking on the street. So we said, well, what can we do about this? Well, Lynn had this idea. His idea was, in one of my lives, I chair the Slater, which is a Navy ship down in the port. We have 20,000 people a year come from around the world. And they ask, where can we buy a sandwich? Or where can we go get a cup of coffee? And the answer in the capital city of the Empire State is very sadly nowhere. And so a group of us got together, formed a not-for-profit called the Albany Waterway, Inc. You can become a friend of that just by email. You've all got Pam's email. Just send her an email and she'll put you on our list of friends, and it doesn't cost you anything. But the idea was to bring the water in above Slater onto Broadway. It used to be that there was something called the Albany Yacht Club. And the Albany Yacht Club is now located in Rensselaer. But it used to be right on the other side of the D&H building, or the SUNY headquarters, as we call it. And it was this beautiful, beautiful building. It had cars would drive over this little bridge to go there. And when they built the Empire State Plaza, they filled all that in and destroyed it all. And they did the same thing with Lock 1, which is historic Lock 1 of the Erie Canal, which is up near Central Warehouse, if you know where that is. They dumped dirt on that. So that's buried. So the group that we're part of really has three things they're working on. One of them is to unbury Lock 1. And so that's a complicated issue because we don't have control over the land. There's permitting involved. You know, it's a 1.5 mile kind of thing to go from the southern end up to Lock 1. And you think about these people doing this 353 miles over huge forest, over the Montezuma Swamp, getting to Lockport, and they had to go up 65 feet. And you think about all the things they overcame in 7 years. And it's just, I mean, it blows your mind that we can't do this in 1.5 miles in Albany. But in any event, there is something that's said about naysayers in here also, which the author notes with a quote basically saying, you know, people don't want anything done, always try to delay it. So here, there's three parts. One is to bring water in by the Slater and flood the area in front of the SUNY Plaza and make that the Albany Yacht Club, make that an open place where there's boats. Mm. And you know that people love being around water. Now, Lynn Tantillo can't even swim, but he came up with this idea. He doesn't even own a boat. And so basically, the idea is it'd be a place where there would be retail there would be more businesses, there'd be jobs, there'd be creative, be transformative. And you could sit out in the water and have a glass of wine or some ice cream or something. It would completely transform downtown Albany. The second piece is to do the north end up by Lock 1. And basically that's to open up the lock to the river. We know where it is. It's beautiful. If you've seen any of the locks, it's the same as all the locks you can see. It just happened to be buried. Boats would come in to a boat basin, which is right in front of that Central Warehouse. And then they would go into a weigh lock and be weighed. The weigh lock is just like the one in downtown Syracuse, which is a beautiful, beautiful building. We know where it is. We've gotten some funds to do a study on all of this. So we'll be coming out with a report probably in June on this, which will make widely available. And the third piece is to connect the two ends. And that's to bring water down Broadway from the southern end up to the northern end. Again, this is only going to happen because it's going to be a grassroots effort. So we have now over 1,000 friends, and that's what's going to take the political will to get this done. Because politicians, they think in short cycles. The thing we've done, we've studied canals all around the country, What we find is that the return on the public investment is about $12 for every $1 of public money spent. So people say, how much will it cost to do this? And that is a good question. But the real question, and we saw this in Erie Canal, they were repaid their full investment in 10 years. That's 1835 is paid off. And here we are 190 years later, and we've had a benefit of all the commerce that has created. The same thing would happen with our idea. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions about it, but it's a big deal and we are hard at it. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah,
for
it's
that.
perfect timing with the 200th anniversary. I want to get to these great comments in the chat. Here's someone, Alexandra, says, New York curriculum teaches about the Erie Canal in 4th grade. My kids, Albany City Schools, both went on a Dutch apple cruise through a lock on a field trip. That's great. I hope all kids get that opportunity. Here's Daniel says, as far as awareness of the canal goes, it's disappointing to me that there is nothing in the State Museum about the canal. I'm not sure there's nothing. I don't think it's significant. What's that? I heard something, sorry, but I think, the Governor Hochul has proposed committing 150 million for the State Museum revamp and another 250, 300 million to revitalize downtown Albany. I mean, I think if you are interested in the canal and see what it could do to revitalize, now's the time to make your voices heard, because there's going to be a lot of discussion about how to spend that big chunk of money. Here's another comment from a second one from Renato. I think there's also some kind of boat cruise in Lockport to experience the canal and how the locks work. Other town cities along the canal route may have something as well. Has everyone been on that?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
do.
Yeah, I've done one that went out of Mohawk, and it did some of the canal and also went through the locks, and it was pretty fascinating because there's parts out there where you can still see the canal, and it was a few years ago and they were still building a lot of the bike path. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Here's another comment from Gene again. I'd love to see Lock 1 unburied. As BJ suggests, it would be lovely to have the basin and way lock back again as well. Even better, something about the exit lock from the original canal, which was slightly north of Lock 1. Yeah, these are great ideas. What's amazing, that technology, when you hear of the Waylock, it was essentially like a watery truck stop scale of modern times. They managed to weigh the ship, the packet boat, empty and then with cargo, and they could calculate how much you would have to pay to go through that. Fascinating. And part of the waterway group are experienced archaeologists, and we have a lot of information. They dug some samples a few years ago, and Len Tantillo has found the original drawings. When you look at them, it's like the pyramids of Giza. They're these massive, beautiful stone block neoclassical structures, and to think that you could uncover it after 150 years. The canal probably stopped operating in the 1850s. So anyway, 150 years to uncover it and to show when Albany was at the center of the world. This canal changed everything. Here's one more. A general question from Beth for the group. Because of the sloops, steamboat, canals, and trains in the 1700s to 1800s, Albany played a big role in the first half of the history of our country. Then it feels like Albany faded from the national picture. I always wonder what changed and why. Well, I have one suggestion. I wrote a long biography of Mayor Erastus Corning, and I don't think the Democratic machine did all that much to move the city forward. I think they were interested in holding on to power and the status quo, and I think you've seen that repeated in different political organizations. I also think, I don't know, I came here in 1981 from the Pacific Northwest, which always seems clean and new and optimistic, and they love water out there. We have water everywhere. You're walking always around water, and everything develops around water. But I came here and I was fascinated by the architecture and the history. And then everyone started running down Albany. Albany is like, I know there's this weird negativity that I still find around the small Albany is the shorthand for it. But I do find that I don't know why that people kind of denigrate the city. I do think it has serious problems now with gun violence and other issues. But what does everyone else think? I think Beth's right that it has changed, declined, but why do you think that is?
Well, I think
Anyone?
one thing we have to consider is that the center of the economic center of gravity for the country continued to move west. And industries that were very successful serving this market, I'm thinking of the iron industry in Troy in particular. They were very successful selling rails to East Coast railroads, but when the country expanded to the west, they lost their competitive advantage to iron mills in the Midwest. And I think that happened generally as the country expanded towards the west, that the economy of the East Coast became generally less important.
Right. And Steve put in, you're very knowledgeable. I appreciate your expertise, Steve. In 2017, the State Museum had a major exhibit on the Erie Canal. Not sure if there was anything on permanent display. I have seen, elements, but it's not like a whole section like, I don't know, Broadway and the turn of the century that they have, or I mean, the 9/11 exhibit is phenomenal, but I don't see that much attention paid to the Erie Canal that when I go to the State Museum, but maybe that's part of the revamp. I also here's a link to BJ's project. You can go to the website. Thanks for putting that up, Mike. It's in your chat, www.albanywaterway.org. Denise, my husband and I have kayaked through the lock at Seneca Falls and Lockport. Do you want to unmute and tell us what that was like, Denise? And have you kayaked through this area? Although it would have to be on the Mohawk River, I guess, through the barge.
Come on, Denise. Tell them.
How was that kayaking through there, Denise?
Do you see her, Dan, with Denise on?
No, but yeah.
She's not on.
That's okay. We've got a lot of good comments coming in. If you want to add any travel log, you can. Leo says there was a temporary exhibit in the Near State Museum about the Erie Canal. It was very well done, but it was a temporary thing. Okay, it might have been that 2017 exhibit Steve mentioned. Here's Francis. Cornhill Navigation has been running a replica canal packet boat on the Erie Canal, including Lock 32 in Rochester since 1991.
Signed up.
Has anyone been up?
They only got 52 people.
Mhm.
I'm not the only one that don't make it.
I think I'm unmuted now.
We're getting some feedback.
Woo!
Can you mute those, Pam?
Okay. So I don't know why it was doing that. So this is Denise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I grew up outside of Syracuse and I'm really familiar with the Erie Canal, the Erie Boulevard. You know, they paved the whole canal and named it Erie Boulevard. And I've been to the museum there. But my husband and I, we've kayaked on a lot of the Erie Chenango. We have this big flotation thing. You start out in East Syracuse and go up to Chenango. The other thing, we rode the bike path, and if you get up near Pattersonville, you ride along, and it's the original Erie Canal. It's like really mossy, but it's all there. It's just amazing. So
That's
if you wanna
great.
get on your bike.
Yep. I'm going to read a few more comments here. Really good chat going on. I appreciate everyone weighing in. Maybe you want to mute again, Denise. I think we're getting feedback. Stephanie, Bernstein emphasizes the status of New York City as the business beneficiary of the canal, and Albany was just a transfer point. But later on, didn't Albany become a financial center in the Gilded Age through and beyond circa 1900? I mean, I think we see Albany as the focal point. I agree that this book doesn't build Albany as the thing. It talks about, it was all about connecting to the Hudson River so you could get to New York City. I mean, it was certainly the first lock on the 363 miles, but I agree with Stephanie that the author doesn't overinflate Albany's role in the commerce of the Erie Canal. Everything as today, New York City drives the state and drives a lot of sectors and industries, and certainly did 200 years ago as well. Here's a good Joanne has a comment. We never capitalized the access to the Hudson River. In fact, we made access difficult for the citizens. That's a big reason for denigrating Albany. I mean, 787, and this leads right into it. We're kind of moving on from the book, but it's a great thing about books. They spur ideas and conversation. And I think, this is front and center right now. Here's Libby says, US DOT is considering several different options for rerouting I-787 and the Dunn Memorial Bridge. You've read about that. Several options involve reducing 787 to a ground level street with a couple intersections, removing it from the interstate system. How is this being coordinated with the waterway project, or how will the two projects affect each other? I'll put that to BJ.
Sure, they don't interfere with each other. Both can be done. Part of the issue with the road, we met with a group last night to discuss this, and part of the issue is the water level of the river. Some of you may remember how Albany was constantly flooded. Broadway used to be a waterway in the spring. It would all flood out, and there's a lot of pictures of that around. But yet, as we have these rising tides and the river is rising, and to talk about a boulevard, that could be there. The waterway would go under that at the southern end, and at the northern end, it would go under it also. So it's not inconsistent that each of these can happen. Part of the issue on 787, and there'll be a study coming out from DOT later this year about it, is that the projection was it would take 8 years and $8 billion. So maybe under some Democratic administration that could happen. I think under the current administration, it's a very long shot for that to ever happen in our lifetime. So I hope I am wrong, by the way, but it's not inconsistent with anything that we're dealing with on creating a waterway at all. That's a great question.
Thank you, BJ. Here's a good comment from Leo. I'm a Chicago transplant, lived in Albany for the last 10 years. I love it out here. Everything is so accessible in the capital region versus the traffic in Chicago or New York City. And the Albany Writers Institute is awesome. That's not a plant. We're not related. That's Leo.
Wow.
Thank you. It was worth showing up tonight. And Bob chimes in, Chicago was a great beneficiary of the canal. We had a group, an amazing international architectural firm that presented to the waterway and other groups, people that we invited, that the amazing work that they did to create the waterfront and canal in Chicago. It transformed downtown. Here's a good question from Gene. 2 specific questions arising from statements in the book. Does anyone here know, number 1, how or why did New York State come by the name Empire State? Number 2, surprised that New York was the primary port for the export of Southern cotton. Could the Erie Canal, that was the end of it. So one, I mean, according to this book and my senses, the Empire State came because the Erie Canal was, a connector from the world to New York City, up the Hudson, through Albany, and out to the western part of the country, right?
Yes.
Who has another? I mean, the Erie Canal created that term, right? We're now we built an empire with this 4-foot deep ditch, Yeah. Surprised the New York primary port for the export of Southern cotton. Anyone have a comment on that?
How'd the cotton get to New York? I don't know. Didn't come down the Erie Canal.
No, but it came out around the Atlantic and back up, right?
Yeah.
I think most of the cotton was actually shipped directly from southern ports.
I do too.
Like Charleston in particular.
Okay. Canals, Stephanie again, canals now are great for rowing and kayaking. I rowed on the Hudson for a couple of years with Albany's Rowing Club. It can be a kind of scary stretch of water. It'd be great if a new downtown waterway could accommodate shells and be long enough, circa 2 kilometers, to host the head of the Hudson Regatta. What a
Whoa.
great idea. You're thinking way ahead of us, Stephanie. Here's April. I live in Waterford and actually just drove over Lock 2. Every year they have Canal Fest when the canal opens for the season. This year's May 16th through 18th. Yep. It's a great event. They have free boat rides on the canal. You can also canoe kayak the Waterford flight. Definitely recommend to everyone. And it's very kid friendly too. Thank you for that, April. Let's see. Here's another comment from Lynn. The Riverwalk in San Antonio transformed the tourist experience in the Alamo neighborhood. BJ is all over San Antonio. Yeah. That's part of one of the canals that this group is studying, and why can't it happen here?
Same thing in Oklahoma City. They had Bricktown, they called it. They paid it off with a 1 cent sales tax for 2 years that built this incredible canal in Oklahoma. We're talking about the middle of the country, Oklahoma and Texas, the middle of the country. And here we sit on this great river and just don't take advantage of it. There are people who are loopers, and loopers are people who they travel from the southern climes up the inland waterway to New York City, up the Hudson River. Then they go across ultimately to Chicago, to the Mississippi River and down. They call them loopers. They stop in Castleton. They stop in Troy. Do they stop in the capital city of the Empire State? No, because there's no place to stop or nothing to do when you get here, which is all these opportunities are just lost.
So, yeah, Jim Ayers has a question. I can't see
I have
you
a
on
comment.
the screen.
I just Googled where did the name Empire State come from?
Okay.
The response I got was nickname Empire State for New York State likely stems from the 1785 letter where George Washington, in a letter to James Duane, New York City mayor, called New York, quote, the seat of the empire.
All right.
Well, there you
So
go.
it predated the Erie Canal. Thank you, Jim. Google is great. Was that AI generated or was that actually?
It was AI generated.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. AI.
But then, we teach young students about news literacy. We'd have to go back and look at the source. That could have been a deep fake. That could have been misinformation. that could have been propaganda. You can't trust what you read. But this book is very trustworthy, very well written, very well researched. I'm sorry the author has passed away. He probably had more good books in him. But I know we're coming up on the hour. What should we type in there, Pam? Oh, here it is. No.
Well, I think too, I think one of the takeaways from this too is looking at the legacy. The canal ended up where it was because you had a passage through the mountains. It was fairly flat to get from Albany to Buffalo. And then the railroad followed that. And the thruway followed that. I mean, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo would certainly not be the cities that they are today without the canal. And now we've gone back to now we're biking it all. So the legacy of the cities and the growth that they saw from the industry, is directly related to the canal. And some of those cities were a small dot on the map before the canal went through.
Right. I don't remember seeing this in the book, but I think someone's probably a closer reader than I am. Again, my small little experiment with my backyard pond. In stretches of drought, high heat, you lose a lot through evaporation. I can just kind of drop my garden hose and, fill it back up so my 20 goldfish or whatever, they keep multiplying, have enough room to swim around. But how did they, especially, when the ice melted at the beginning of spring, the water is often very low. Can you answer that, BJ? How did was everything on a grade so it kind of flowed in from the Hudson and through, or maybe Steve, did they have to fill it in occasionally?
Well, I think
with
It
they
flowed
had
the
a
other way.
system of what so-called feeder canals. and they would control the water, the level of the water in the main canal through these feeder canals, which are always linked to a more or less permanent source of water, like another
Like a
river or a
reservoir,
lake.
not a, yeah, a lake or something. Okay.
Yeah.
So they kind of filled it up. Their version of the garden hose were these little feeder hoses or
Feeders, and
something.
it went west to east.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it couldn't be from one source of water flowing all the time, 360
No, there are a
miles.
number of, as he said, feeder canals.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna give Steve an A for, and I think BJ an A. I'm not sure I would get a good grade on this, but it's been a lot of
Oh,
fun.
come on.
Don't quiz me on this.
You're
I
gonna
do
get
not
a
read
good
every
garden
page.
hose.
I'm behind on my reading, but yeah, it's a great group here. I love the interest in history, in literature. I see so many familiar names, and you know, Pam's group. I hope you've been to the city's oldest house. Maybe you want to talk about that project. I've been down there different times and seen the progress, and I like writing about it. And it's an amazing. It's your biggest project, Pam.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty exciting. We are going to be finished before December 31st of this year. Partly because that's when the grants run out and we have to spend the money. But it's been pretty warp speed. If you drive by right now, you'll see the entire front of the building is encased in scaffolding. We are working on the roof. We are going to be moving the roof slightly and putting it back to its original pitch. So we're going to be dismantling and reassembling the original 1728 roof over the next couple of weeks. So that's a pretty exciting project. We're also doing some other, you know, mundane but super expensive things like elevator shafts and fire rated stairwells and all those fun things that we have to have now. But yeah, if you haven't been down, we do tours every first Friday. And also, you know, you can always call me and we take people through all the time, but it's an incredibly exciting project to, you know, we're thrilled to be the stewards of this building and this part of its history. And we are really excited to be able to make it our headquarters probably early next year once the building's done and we move down. So if you haven't been, absolutely, or if you haven't been in a while, the changes are pretty dramatic.
Thank you for doing
Yeah,
that,
so-
Pam. Leo, the
Yeah.
answer is yes. It's down by the bus station.
Yeah.
Yes,
in
we
the
are
chat.
the lone little building in the parking lot district.
So here's a couple other comments. Gene, again, one function of the Black River Canal was to feed the Erie Canal. Thanks for that. And Alexander's book recommendation, The Artificial River, the Erie Canal and the Paradox of Progress by Carol Sheriff, 1996. I think I have that on my shelf here. I have a lot of local history books. But yeah, I mean, Peter Bernstein did a great service, I think, with his book. I know there's many other Erie Canal books, but it was a good choice. How did you come up with the book club idea and stuff, Pam? How far back does this go? I'm trying to remember.
Moby Dick.
That's right. Okay? That was the first, and then it was like Crazy
At
Ladies of
Historic
Pearl
Albany
Street.
Foundation, we always like to say that some of our best ideas start out as a joke.
The
Maeve
whale of a
McInerney-
book.
So
Oh.
so Maeve McInerney and
BJ.
I were it was going to be I think it was Melville's 200th birthday, and there is connection to Albany and connection to you know, historic structures that are here. He lived in a house near McGeary's, so that was actually a 6-month project. We met once a month at the pump station for 6 months, and we slogged our way through Moby Dick. And I want to say that was 2019. And then obviously we had a pandemic and went online. But we've kept it online. We usually announce the book in the fall and do it around now when people are stuck in the house and reading. And so we do it every spring.
You
Great.
guys do a lot for a small organization. I'm amazed with Built and all your house tours and now taking on this major construction restoration project. Yeah, I got to hand it to Historic Albany. And I remember some of your previous, but there not been that many directors, right? What number director are you on the whole history here?
I might be like maybe number 7 or 8
Oh, you
in
are?
50
Okay.
years. Yeah,
didn't,
there
I'm
were a few short termers. I
Yeah.
think Susan Holland was the longest term person at 12 years. Miriam Tremontosi, who is on the call on tonight, she was executive director number 2.
Oh, I've known Miriam and I did not know that. That's neat.
Yeah, she was executive director. Louise Merritt was our first executive director. She worked with Matt Bender and getting us founded in 1974. And then Miriam was director number 2.
I was,
I'm the third director in 41 years of the New York State Writers Institute, and the only living director, past or present. But I think I'm living because I think I work for BJ. He keeps a tight ship on this waterway. He's got us all cracking, right, Pam?
Yes, absolutely.
But anyway, it is a great opportunity, and you need visionaries like Len Tantillo and people who get things done, as BG has done with the Slater and so many other projects he's been part of. And yeah, it's what made the Erie Canal. A lot of people said it couldn't be done. A lot of people were against it, and it took some strong, DeWitt Clinton, Gouverneur Morris, Elkanah Watson. I mean, there's a bunch of names in there. John Adams was an early kind of proponent, I guess. Yeah.
Paul, can I ask you a
Yes.
question? It's Miriam.
Yes.
I'm wondering if in the parking lot district, if any of you know whether there are more concrete plans for how that's going to develop. Are they seriously talking about a soccer stadium down there?
The last that I have officially heard is that Capitalize Albany put the property in the hands of a realtor to promote it to developers. I haven't actually seen the listing yet, so I'm not sure whether it's the vacant land as well as the vacant buildings on Broadway. So I haven't heard anything concrete being discussed yet, but that doesn't mean there aren't proposals.
So the state has put out an RFP, and they want to pay a consultant $1 million. We should all line up for this. $1 million to come up with a plan to deal with basically the area within a mile of the Capitol. But Pam's project is right smack in the middle of that, as is the D&H building. And I'm not sure how anybody feels on this call about having a D&H building, one of the most iconic buildings in North America, frankly, as a state office building, when you could probably move, SUNY Central someplace to another place and make that a taxable entity, high-end hotel or restaurants or retail or whatever, and it would draw people downtown. But today it's basically not very occupied, and a lot of people work remotely, and it's an underutilized asset.
Yeah. But the discussions and the public meetings and things for this $300 million investment are going to be going on. And this group that has an interest in history and seemed like a strong interest in the canal and the waterway project, it's time to join forces and make your voices heard. That's how things happen. That's how the Erie Canal happened. So this was really nice. It was, again, great to see familiar names, familiar faces. There's some what I find all the time I write stories, there's always so many people that are so much smarter than I am, and they correct me. But this was so nice to be with an amazing group, and it was a great discussion. Good old Mike Huber. Thanks for this discussion. Glad we remember our history. Fascinating. Anyone have any final thoughts? It's back to you, Pam.
Well, I think going back, to a little bit of what we were talking about downtown Albany, and I mean, it's visionaries who really make these things happen. And I think in some ways that we're lacking that a little bit right now in Albany. We really need some cheerleaders. We really need some visionaries. And it seems almost like nobody wants to be the first to put their toe in the water for development. Once you have a project going, it can be a catalyst for others. So whatever the 400 million is that's coming, we need to turn that into, you know, a lot more money and a lot more investment and really turn things around. I like to say, you know, my little building downtown, I mean, we're putting $4 million into that little building without having any control or knowledge over what's going to happen on 3 sides of us. But we took that risk because we really felt that it was important, and we want to be part of a neighborhood. We want neighbors, we want friends down there. You know, we don't want to be the cheese standing alone in the parking lot anymore. You know, we really want to be part of a new vibrant neighborhood, and we're just waiting for that to happen.
Thank you, Pam. You're a rock star.
Thanks,
It's a
BJ.
really good project, really important project.
So
If I live
this
to
was
see
this
the
was-
end of it next year, I'll be good.
So you'll be sending around ideas for the next book in the fall, right?
Yes, so we
Good.
do try to have it, you know, have some sort of a preservation slant or, you know, something, you know, that deals with our mission, but we're always open to suggestions too.
That's great.
Or we, you know, like with the canal, knowing it was the anniversary, you know, we try to pick a topic that's current that people want to learn about.
Yeah. No, this was a lot of fun. Thanks to everyone for turning out. We've gone well past the hour. Are you ready to call it a do we have a second? Can you second that motion, BJ?
All
that
I
we
would say
conclude
is
this?
that, Paul, don't underestimate yourself. Don't be humble. I talked to your mother today. She said, be nice
That's
to
right.
Paul. He needs some help.
My mother loves the Costello brothers, but her favorite brother is Barry Costello, BJ's little brother, because she lives out near my mother in Tacoma, Washington, is so kind to her. My mom's 93, so kind to her, comes and meets her, brings her out to get clam chowder, and that's the quality of the Costello boys, and I love them.
We get it all back, believe me.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
No,
you.
Thank you.
everybody
Thank you,
for signing
Paul,
up.
Pam, and
Yep.
all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
That's just good, yeah.